I never wanted to be a pastor. That might surprise you, coming from a man who spent 23 years behind a pulpit, who memorized the cadence of Scripture the way a river memorizes its banks, not by choice, but by the relentless pressure of what flows through it. My name is Thaddeus Vorn, and I was born in a town so small it didn't have a stoplight until I was 11 years old. Crest Hollow, West Virginia. Population, 400 and something, depending on who had died that week and whether the Mulberry family had produced another set of twins, which they did with unsettling regularity. My father was a coal man. My grandfather was a coal man. The earth beneath Crest Hollow was carved hollow by generations of Vorns, and for a long time I assumed I would follow them down into that dark, breathing underground. I assumed wrong. The calling came to me at 17, during a thunderstorm that cracked the hickory tree in our backyard clean in half. I was standing at the kitchen window watching it happen, and I felt something move through me that had nothing to do with the lightning. It was quieter than that, more interior, like a hand pressed flat against the inside of my sternum. I didn't hear a voice. I didn't see a light. I just knew, the way you know when you've broken a bone before the pain even arrives, that my life had just been reorganized without my permission. My mother, Reneth, cried when I told her, not sad tears, the other kind, the kind that come from relief so deep it turns to grief briefly on its way out. I studied at Harlow Divinity College in eastern Tennessee, a gray stone building surrounded by dogwood trees that bloomed white every April like the campus was apologizing for something. I was an adequate student. Not brilliant. I had a good memory and a strong voice and the ability to sit with people in their worst moments without needing to fill the silence with noise. That last thing, more than anything, was what made me useful as a pastor. I took my first congregation at 26 in a small Methodist church in Aldenmore, Kentucky. 43 families, a building that leaked when it rained hard and smelled like pine resin and old hymnals, and the particular mustiness of faith sustained under difficult conditions. I loved it fiercely. The years layered on. I married a woman named Corva, who had red-brown hair and an intelligence that made most people slightly uncomfortable because she deployed it without mercy and without cruelty, which is the most disorienting combination. We had 2 children. I built a life that felt, if not spectacular, then solid, real, the kind of life that holds its shape under pressure. The heart attack came on a Thursday in late October. I was 51. I remember the morning clearly because I had been irritable at breakfast over something so trivial I cannot now reconstruct it. The coffee, perhaps, or a disagreement about whether the gutters needed cleaning before the first frost. Corva and I had exchanged words with the particular efficiency of long married people. Precise, a little cold, quickly over. She left for her job at the Aldenmore County Archive. I drove to the church. I was in my office reviewing notes for Sunday's sermon when the pressure began. It didn't announce itself as pain, not at first. It arrived as a tightening, like someone had reached into my chest and was gently but insistently wringing a cloth. I thought I had indigestion. I thought I had slept in a strange position. I opened the window. I drank water. I sat back down and tried to read Nehemiah chapter 2. And then the cloth became a fist, and the fist became a vice, and the vice became a language my body had never spoken before. Absolute, declarative, not interested in argument. I fell. That's the clinical word for it. I fell, and the floor of my office rose to meet me with startling speed. And the last thing I remember before the darkness was the corner of my desk, the grain of the wood, the small brass nameplate Corva had given me for our anniversary that read, Thaddeus Vorn, Servant. And I thought with strange composure, this is it then. It was not it, as it turned out. But what happened next is not something I have any clean language for, even now, 8 years later. The darkness was not dark. That sounds like a contradiction, and I understand why. But if you have ever been in a room where the lights have been off for a very long time, and then someone opens a door from the outside. You know that the dark itself changes. It becomes luminous at its edges, charged, expectant. That is the closest I can come. I was somewhere that had no dimensions I could measure, no floor I could feel, no ceiling I could perceive. And yet I was not falling. I was not floating exactly. I was simply present in a way I had never been present while alive, without the constant low hum of bodily maintenance, the background noise of hunger and temperature, and the dull ache in my left knee that had persisted since a hiking accident in 1998. All of that was gone. What remained was attention, pure, unencumbered attention. The first thing I noticed was the weight of my life, not as judgment, not as accusation, more like walking into a library and realizing that every book on every shelf is a version of yourself, and that you have access to all of them simultaneously. I saw the morning of the argument about the gutters. I saw it with Corva's eyes, and I understood, with a precision that humiliated me gently, that she had not been arguing about gutters. She had been asking whether I was going to be present in our life before it ended, and I had answered the wrong question with the wrong register of voice. I saw dozens of moments like this, the texture of accumulated small failures, each one manageable alone but stacked, a tower that leaned without ever quite falling. I also saw, and this is harder to say, the moments of real goodness, not the public ones, not the sermons that went well or the hospital visits where I said the right thing, the small, private ones. The Tuesday afternoon, I spent 3 hours with Ossian Muir, a 78-year-old widower who collected weather data obsessively and had no one to tell about it. I had listened, genuinely listened, and I felt that wherever I was, that afternoon had weight. Real, lasting, uncorrectable weight. Then the light changed. It is inadequate to call it light. It was more like the concept of light, the principle of it, the thing light is trying to be and occasionally manages on certain mornings in certain places. It gathered, though gather is a word that implies time, and I am not sure time was operating. It simply was, and then it was more. And then I understood that I was in the presence of something that had been present at the beginning of everything, and would be present at the end, and found that interval, the whole of human history, neither long nor short, but simply complete, the way a sentence is complete. I will not claim I saw a face. I will tell you I perceived a person. The distinction matters to me. What I perceived was not the Sunday school image I had carried for decades, not the European face in the illustrated Bibles of my childhood. This was something older and stranger, and more specifically itself than anything I had constructed. It had attended my life in the way a river attends the land it crosses, shaping without announcing, present without performing. And it spoke, or rather, communication occurred. Whether it used sound or something prior to sound, I cannot tell you honestly. What it said, what was transferred, conveyed, pressed into me the way a seal is pressed into warm wax, was not what I expected. I had expected, if I'm honest, comfort, confirmation, the celestial equivalent of a superior reviewing your work and nodding. You did well, we're pleased. Here is your rest. That is not what happened. What was communicated to me, in a way that bypassed every filter I had built over 51 years of controlled emotional presentation, was urgency. Not anger, not disappointment. Something more complex and more difficult. The urgency of someone who loves you and sees you wasting the only irreplaceable thing you have, which is not time and is not talent, but is attention. The capacity to be truly, ruinously, uncomfortably present with another human being. The message, I have thought for 8 years about how to phrase this, was something like, you have been speaking about me to people who needed to be spoken to directly. You have been giving them the map when they needed someone to walk beside them in the territory. And then, what I can only describe as a secondary communication, something appended, urgent in a different key. Go back. There is still time, but not as much as you believe. I want to be careful here. I am not a man given to theatrics. I spent 23 years as a pastor, which means I spent 23 years watching people leverage spiritual experience for attention, for authority, for the pleasant feeling of being extraordinary. I have held that possibility up against my own account many times, in the cold light of early mornings when self-deception is harder to sustain. What I experienced was real. I am as certain of that as I am certain of anything, and I am not a man who uses the word certain loosely. Then the urgency and the light changed texture. I felt something that I can only call a hand, not physical, not metaphorical, but something in between, something that exists in the register where those two categories haven't yet separated, and I was turned, not violently, with the specific gentleness of someone who is returning you to something they know you are not finished with. I woke up on the floor of my office. Brixton Farrell, my associate minister, was performing CPR. He had been doing it for 4 minutes, apparently, after finding me when he came to return a book he had borrowed. His face, when my eyes opened, was the color of old candle tallow. He made a sound I cannot transcribe. The ambulance arrived. The paramedics used language I half understood. There was a defibrillator involved, though I had already returned before it was used. There was an ambulance ride during which I remember watching the ceiling of the vehicle and feeling an odd tenderness for its ordinariness. The scuffed panels, the medical equipment bolted into the walls, the small, impersonal necessity of it all. I survived, to use the conventional word. Corva arrived at the hospital within 20 minutes, still wearing her reading glasses from the archive, the ones she only wore at work and always forgot she had on. She held my hand for 4 hours without saying much. I told her about the gutters, about what I'd understood watching that moment played back from outside myself. She didn't say anything for a long time. And then she said, I know you know. We didn't speak about it again for 3 days, and then we spoke about it for the rest of the year, at intervals, carefully, the way you would handle something that has become very important and is also fragile. I returned to the pulpit 6 weeks later, against medical advice and with the reluctant blessing of the church board. The sermon I gave that Sunday was the most difficult thing I have ever done, and I have done some difficult things. I stood at the lectern in the Aldenmore Methodist Church, in front of those 43 families, plus an additional 30 or so, who had heard something had happened. And I told them I had been a professional Christian for 23 years, and had perhaps forgotten what amateur Christianity looked like. The raw, embarrassed, unpolished version practiced by people who were not getting paid to have faith, who fitted into the margins of their week between the coal mine and the kitchen, between the grief and the grocery list, between the leaking roof and the argument about the gutters. I told them that I had been somewhere. I told them what I had understood there. I told them that if you take anything from the Gospels and strip away the institution and the ceremony and the accumulated performance of 2,000 years of organized religion, what you find at the center is a man who was catastrophically, scandalously present with people, who stopped, who stayed, who looked directly at the person in front of him rather than through them toward the larger, more manageable abstraction of humanity. I told them I had been given something back, and that I intended to spend it differently than I had spent what came before. There was not applause. This was a Methodist church. We did not applaud sermons. But there was a quality of silence afterward that I had never produced from a pulpit in my life, and I recognized it because I had felt something adjacent to it in the place I had been. The silence that isn't emptiness but fullness. The quiet that comes when something true has been placed into a room, and everyone in the room knows it. I am 59 now. I still pastor in Aldenmore, though the church is slightly larger, 61 families, which I do not attribute to that sermon, but to the fact that Corva joined the worship committee and has better organizational instincts than anyone I have ever met. My left knee still aches. The coffee is still sometimes wrong in the morning. The gutters needed cleaning last week, and I did it myself without being asked, standing on the aluminum ladder in the cold with the dead leaves in my hands, thinking about the way ordinary tasks are not separate from the sacred life, but are, in fact, the texture of it. Brixton Farrell became a good friend. He still occasionally mentions those 4 minutes, usually in the context of claiming I owe him something, usually with the uncomfortable humor that accumulates between men who have been through something they cannot fully discuss. I think about the light. Not constantly, not in a consuming or destabilizing way, but regularly, the way you think about a conversation that changed something fundamental. A conversation you keep returning to not because it is unresolved, but because it is so dense with meaning that you find new layers of it as you grow capable of perceiving them. The message was urgency. The message was presence. The message was that the distance I had maintained between myself and other people, the pastoral distance, the professional warmth that is also a kind of managed glass, was not protection. It was waste. I don't know what happens after death in any detail. I know what I experienced, and I know what I was told, and I know that the return was given to me as a gift that carries weight. The weight of it is not burden, it is ballast. It keeps me level in rough water. It keeps me here, paying attention, staying in the room. That, as best as I have been able to understand it in 8 years of living with the memory, is the terrifying message. Not fire, not judgment, not the cosmic accounting ledger. The terrifying message is simpler and more demanding than any of that. You are still alive. Act like it means something. If what I've shared today struck something real in you, like it, share it, and subscribe. This story was waiting for someone exactly like you.